Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 107, Thanks for the Lord's Loving Kindness. But first, we have to go back and look at the Psalms as a whole because we're coming to an important turning point. We look at the structure of the book of Psalms. It's been divided into five books externally. Notice 107 starts off book five. In books one and two, these were written mostly by David. Book three was written mostly by Asaph, the choir director. Book four mostly is unknown, although you've got a couple of, I think you have a couple of Davidic Psalms in there. There's one by Moses. And then book five, again, it's going to be quite a few by David. Book one, we have the term Yahweh used 278 times as opposed to Elohim. Remember, Yahweh is the name of God. Elohim, just the Hebrew word for God, only 15 times. That's reversed in book two, where you've got 198 times with Elohim, only 32 times with Yahweh. You get to books three and four. Book three, there's not that big of a difference. 63 versus 44. That's pretty much even. Book four, again, Yahweh comes to the forefront, and book five also. Yahweh, notice 235 times against Elohim, only 31 times. So again, Yahweh we're going to see a lot. But in this psalm is going to give a little bit of both, but more often with Yahweh than with Elohim. Now, let's begin the psalm with a prelude. The first few verses are a prelude. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And that opening phrase is used word for word a couple of times in First Chronicles, chapter 16, verse 34, again in chapter 20 and verse 21 of First Chronicles. We saw it in the last psalm, in Psalm 106, verse 1. And we're going to see it again in this fifth book of the Psalms in 118 verse 1 and 118 verse 29, and also starting off in Psalm 136. So this is going to be a familiar phrase, already has been, and it will be again. And notice we begin with that word, that term loving kindness. I have pointed out in the past already that that's the Hebrew word chesed, a little bit of guttural there. My own favorite translation is loyalty, but loving kindness works as well as his mercies, and sometimes I'll go in that direction. Loyalty is my default. And we see that phrase here is loving kindness is everlasting. And when we get to the very last verse of this psalm, and it's going to be verse 43, it will end with a call to consider the loving kindness. Notice the loving kindnesses, it'll be plural there, of the Lord. And so from beginning to end, it's his loving kindness, his loyalty, his mercy that's going to come to view. Continue with the rest of the prelude. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, those that God has gathered, those who he has rescued, whom he has redeemed from the hand of the adversary and gathered from the land. So notice he's redeemed them. He's also gathered them from the east, from the west, from the north, and from the south. That's our prelude. And so with that served as our introduction. Let's go into the psalm itself. Now, I've given you an out. We're going to see the psalm, not counting the prelude. There's going to be five more sections to it. So the first three verses of the prelude that we just looked at, where we saw the opening prelude, thanks to the Lord, and God's people are gathered from the east, the west, the north, and the south. Now we jump and we jump in and start with a problem in this, and I'm going to call these stanzas or sections or whatever term you want to use. And each one is going to begin with a problem where they, of course, you say, who's the they? That's God's people. They wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. They did not find a way to an inhabited city. And I circle that because that phrase is actually going to come up again a couple of times, both here and in the very last section, the last stanza. So here's the Israelites, and I think that's who were in view. They wandered in a wilderness, in a desert region. They did not find a way to inhabit city. They were hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted within them. Think about the Israelites leaving Egypt, and let me just say, I've been to Egypt and I spent a few weeks there, and then after a few weeks we left. I mean, it's all politically Egypt today, but we left the land along the Nile. That was ancient Egypt, and we went out into the Sinai. And the Sinai is is rocky and dry and sort of, let me just say, sort of dirty. And after about 2 hours, I was ready to go back. And they were hungry and thirsty. So notice, they wandered in the wilderness. They were hungry, thirsty. Their soul fainted within them. They weren't in an air-conditioned bus like Paula and I were. Um, and they go out into the wilderness. That's the problem. Verse 6, we see the deliverance. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He delivered them, so they cried out to him. That's going to be a repeated phrase. They cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He delivered them out of their distresses. He led them also by a straight way to an inhabited city. Remember, they came out and there was no inhabited city, but he's going to bring them to a place that will be an inhabited city. We're going to come full circle and see that at the end. We go from deliverance to thanksgiving about the deliverance. This is still that first stanza. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of Israel. And notice how I circled the whole thing. Get used to that, because we're going to see that here in the first stanza, in the second, in the third, in the fourth. We won't see it in the last one, but I'm holding off until we get there. But it's going to be word for word. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness, for his chesed, remember, for his wonders to the sons of men. For he has satisfied the thirsty soul, and the hungry soul he has filled with what is good. And so notice how we had the problem, the solution, and now the thanksgiving. So, as I just said, they had the problem. They wandered. That was verses 4 through 9. They cried to the Lord. He saved them. That was part of the solution. And therefore give thanks to him because he has helped the thirsty and the hungry. Now, we're going to see that same outline now repeated 3 more times. And then the last time it's going to change a little bit. So let's now go to verse 10. Verse 10, we start with the problem. There were those who dwelt in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in misery and chains, because they had rebelled against the words of God. Now, this time we're seeing the problem, not just their circumstances, but the problem was the people themselves. They had rebelled against the words of God. They had spurned the counsel of the Most High. Therefore, he humbled their heart with labor. They stumbled, and there was none to help. This sounds like Israelites back when they were still in Egypt under slavery. But notice the problem had been brought about, in a sense, by themselves. Now, is it in slavery or is it some other thing? Perhaps. That's what comes to mind when I first see that, especially with the labor that's being referenced. So he humbled their heart with labor. They stumbled, and there was none to help. We go now to the deliverance. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He saved them out of their distress. Notice that sort of 1-2 punch. Again, it's almost word for word from the previous stanza, from the first stanza. And notice he brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death and broke their bands apart. So he delivered. That's the deliverance. So we had the problem. We have the deliverance up in verses 13 and 14. Next, we see the thanksgiving. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of men. We've seen that phrase again. We'll see it a few more times. For he has shattered the gates of bronze and cut bars of iron asunder. He's broken the bonds that held them. He's set them free. That was the second stanza, or the second round. Next, we move. Let's summarize again. So, second stanza, we had the problem. It was rebellion and death. They cried to the Lord. That's going to be the regular refrain. And actually, it was word for word. He saved them. And now give thanks to the Lord. Again, word for word the same. And we see that he shattered the gates of bronze and their chains, and he set them free. So that's verses 10 through 16. Now we're ready to see the third round. The third stanza, again, we start with a problem. Fools, because of their rebellious way and because of their iniquity, were afflicted. Their soul abhorred all kinds of food, and they drew near to the gates of death. That's the problem. They were brought about, again, by their rebellion, but they were getting ready to die. And notice, when it talks about their soul abhorred all kinds of food, That's no longer in Egypt. Now we're out in the wilderness. Remember the instance where they've been in the wilderness and God's been feeding them for a long time with manna, and they complain and they say, "We're tired of this manna. We want real food." And they're ignoring what God has given. That stuff tasted good, but they're tired of it. They want to change, and they're complaining to the Lord. And in doing so, notice, they drew near to the gates of death. They're in danger of dying at the hands of the Lord because of their rebellion. Verse 19, the deliverance, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. We've seen this line already 2 times before. And the response, he saved them out of their distress. He sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destructions. And again, they complain, and God judges. I think of one of the instances where he judges and sends serpents and raises up the bronze serpent. That's one of the instances. I'm not sure exactly which one is in view here, but it's these wilderness destructions that are being described. We go on now to Thanksgiving. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of men. That's the third time we've seen that refrain. Verse 22, let them also offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his works with joyful singing. And so ends the third stanza, the third part of the song, the third song. Summary, we have the problem was rebellion and death again. They cried to the Lord again. He saved them again. Give thanks to the Lord. And this time the closing refrain is about offering sacrifices and telling of his works and singing of his works. We're ready now for the fourth stanza. We go to the fourth stanza. We start with the problem. Notice this time, those who go down to the sea in ships. You say, wait a second, I was waiting for a problem. This isn't a problem. Well, that's because you're not Jewish. And ancient Jewish, I should say, because I don't know that it's the same thing. In fact, I suspect it's not with modern Jewish people. But throughout the Bible, throughout ancient Hebrew times, anytime a Jewish person gets into a boat, let me just say, there's going to be a problem. Every single time, and it's going to be a problem here in this psalm as well. Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters, they have seen the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. I mean, the ocean is a big place, and God is bigger. He made it. Verse 25, where he spoke and raised up, and here's the problem, he spoke and raised up a stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. The problem isn't the water. The problem is that there's storms on the water. Think about it. Even in the New Testament, when you get to the Sea of Galilee, which really isn't a sea, it's just a big lake, and yet you see storms there. And what I find interesting is that this psalm mirrors the experience of the disciples on the Sea of Galilee. I can't help but wonder if they went through what they went through on the Sea of Galilee with the storm and Jesus calming the storm, and then they read this psalm. I can't help but think that maybe they had been there, done that experience. So let's continue. Notice we have the problem, and the problem's not done yet. Continue with the problem. It's into verse 26 now. They rose up to the heavens, speaking of the waves. They went down to the depths. Even reading it's going to make you seasick if you're prone to that sort of thing. Verse 27, their soul melted away in their misery. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. So it's miserable. They're reeling, they're staggering. The waves are going up, they're going down, and the world just seems to be in a terrible place because they're on the sea. So they're at their wits' end. They don't know what to do. And again, the disciples in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, they wake up Jesus. But here, there's people that aren't necessarily with Jesus. They're just on the boats, and there's nobody to wake up. And what are they going to do? Well, they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. Now, that's not word for word what we saw before, but it's close enough. Saved them, delivered them, brought them out of the distress. And notice how he did that. He caused the storm to be still so that the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad because they were quiet, so he guided them to their desired haven. Like I said, that sounds so much like Jesus and the disciples on the Sea of Galilee that I almost want to take this psalm as a prophecy. And yet the psalmist, I don't think he's talking about that. I think he's talking about Jewish experiences out on the ocean, which are mirrored in a number of places. So that's the deliverance. He guides them. They get to their desired haven. He guides them there. And now we have the thanksgiving. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness. This is the fourth and last time we're going to see it worded this way. And for his wonders to the sons of men. And of course, you're supposed to be giving thanks every time you see that. Let them extol him also in the congregation of the people and praise him at the seat of the elders. So fourth stanza, notice again, we had the problem, storm. This time it's a storm on the sea. There's not a rebellion thing here, just a storm. They cried to the Lord. He stilled the storm. That was what saved them. Give thanks to the Lord. That refrain was the same. And let them extol and praise him. Now we come to the last one. And at first, I was looking at the last one, and I thought maybe it was two. But I've come to the conclusion this is one last stanza. So we're going to start again with a problem, but this time it will be a problem and solution. It's going to be sort of grouped up together, where he has made fruitful land dry and dry land into springs of water. So he's made things that were good, he made bad, and things that were bad, he made good. Let's jump in and look at it. Here's the problem, but it's going to be a problem with solution. He changes rivers into a wilderness. That's not good. That's bad. When you've got, and that's not dangerous rivers. In other words, he takes what would be fruitful land and he makes it dry. Notice, and springs of water into a thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salt waste because of the wickedness of those who dwell in it. So we've got a problem. There are those who are wicked, and what he has done in response to that, here in verses 33 and 34, the rivers were turned into a wilderness. The springs of water were turned into a thirsty ground. When we come to the next verse, verse 35, we're going to see where he did just the opposite to his people, to the repentant, to the poor. He takes a wilderness and turns that into pools of water. He takes the dry land and turns it into springs of water. Let's look at that. Verse 35, he changes the wilderness into a pool of water and a dry land into springs of water. And there he makes the hungry to dwell. Those that, they're not, these aren't the rebellious people. He makes the hungry dwell not in the dry land, but in the dry land that he's turned into springs of water. And not in the wilderness, but in the wilderness that he turned into pools of water. In other words, the places where he has fixed the problem so that they may establish. Remember how we had that reference to the inhabited city? Where they came out of Egypt and they were in the wilderness, they were looking for the inhabited city. Well, now we see it's the hungry, the have-nots, that are going to establish an inhabited city. And, verse 37, and sow fields and plant vineyards and gather a fruitful harvest because he has turned the wilderness into a watered place. Verse 38, also he blesses them and they multiply greatly. Notice who the he is. By the way, we had verse 4, they wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. They didn't find a way to an inhabited city. But now he has made them establish an inhabited city. And he blesses them, verse 38, and they multiply greatly. He does not let their cattle, and notice the they are the ones who had been hungry. He does not let their cattle decrease. He's taking care of the poor, the ones that are helpless, before him, the ones, can I say it this way? The ones that could do no more except to cry out to the Lord. And so I really think the idea is there, even if the terminology wasn't there. These are the ones that cried out to the Lord, as opposed to those who did not, as opposed to those who were self-sufficient. And so notice the deliverance continues when they, and that's the poor and the helpless, when they are diminished and bowed down through oppression, misery, and sorrow. He pours contempt upon princes. Now that term princes Uh, Nadivim, um, prince's works, although there's a different word that you could have also used for a prince. Um, so princes, nobles, the sort of the high and mighty, that's the idea here. He pours contempt upon them and makes them, the princes, that is, the people that are, the nobility, the high and mighty, the ones that have been lording over the helpless, and makes them wander in a pathless waste. But he sets the needy securely on high, away from affliction, and makes I think that's his families, that's the needy's families, like a flock. The upright, I'm going to suggest that the needy and the upright are the same people. Maybe not, but I think so. The upright see it and are glad, but all unrighteousness shuts its mouth. So notice it's a contrast between the unrighteous and the righteous, between the helpless and the ones that don't need God's help because they're strong in their own strength. But really, God is stronger, and that's the whole point that we're seeing here. So notice this has been both deliverance and judgment sort of combined in here. And now we see the final call. And here's how the psalm is going to end. It ends, we start with a question. Who is wise? Now that almost takes me from being a thanksgiving psalm, which this has largely been, a call to praise and thank the Lord. And yet when you ask who is wise, that's shades of a wisdom psalm. Like, have you heard what's going on? Who is wise? Let him give heed to these things and consider the loving kindness of the Lord. You see how we started with loving kindness, and don't forget, actually, that's wisdom. That's it. Yes, it's a call to worship. Yes, it's a call to give thanks, but it's a call to wisdom too. Consider the loving kindnesses, and we've seen a bunch of them. They've been racked up in 5 stanzas. Consider the loving kindnesses of the Lord. And so, just summing up here with this last section, we had both problem and solution, that he made the fruitful land dry, and he made the dry land into springs of water. We saw that he helps the hungry, but actually punishes the ones that are self-satisfied. And we end, notice, with this question, who is wise? And then the call to give heed and consider the mercies of the Lord.